All of this comes at a delicate moment for cybersecurity. The White House is already running into the conflict between protecting users and preserving an open internet. Bob Kolasky is the Senior Vice President for Critical Infrastructure at Exiger, and he was also the founding director for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency's National Risk Management Center at the Department of Homeland Security. Bob, thanks for coming on tonight. And I actually want to start with TikTok because it wants to fight in court.
Sure.
And ByteDance, is saying we're not going to sell, but there were also some reports that it was denying where it was saying behind the scenes they are looking at maybe some backup plan to sell that doesn't include selling its algorithm. So from a cybersecurity perspective, what good would that even do, selling everything else but the algorithm?
So, as you've been talking about already today in the discussion around TikTok, we're trying to deal with two risks. The U.S. government's trying to deal with two risks related to TikTok. One is data protection of American data and the Chinese government getting access to American citizens' data through requirements it can put on ByteDance to get access from TikTok. And so anything that can be built in the system to limit the access of users' data to TikTok as an app, to ByteDance as an owner of TikTok, and then from ByteDance to the Chinese government, and to protect that data and to extend that sort of cycle of data protection, I think is a good thing. And then the other side is on the propaganda side, where there is evidence that the government has that the Chinese government is using TikTok to push propaganda, and has the ability to use TikTok to push propaganda for American citizens. And I think it's wise to think of ways we can protect against propaganda.
I mean, given your background and experience, I'm curious, why is it that we haven't seen publicly, at least, the evidence that we've been told exists when it comes to these threats?
I think part is to make sure that the evidence is ready to be prepared in a legal setting, right? And so part of this is just the right protections to have, as the legislative process goes through, as this gets in the courts, you want to have the strongest case possible. There's also an aspect, of course, of some of this is sensitive information that in terms of intelligence collection and concerns that the government has related to TikTok. And so I think it's really to prepare the case to be as strong as possible, and then to make sure that the evidence properly is framed in what should be shared with the American public.
How would you rate our government's response to cybersecurity threats? I mean, even beyond TikTok. Making
progress. We've done a lot as a government. The government has done a lot. The U.S. government has done a lot over the last 10 years, but so too has the adversary gotten better. The improvements that have been made in information sharing by the U.S. government and working with the private sector to share information about cyber risks, vulnerability identification, and then increasingly what the Biden administration has been trying to do, start to work on closing vulnerabilities in software and hardware, in supply chain, and this idea of secure by design, secure by default of underlying technologies as part of our cyber systems. I think that's making some real progress there. So the government has made progress in that areas, but again, such as the adversary, technology has continued to evolve, so you can't rest on any laurels.
I mean, how can we ever catch up? What would it take?
I don't know if catch up's the right phrase. There's perpetually going to be is cybersecurity, cyber weapons are just a different type of weapon. There's always going to be the reality that weapons can be used to do harm against targets, and whether it's a kinetic weapon or whether it's a sort of physical attack or whether it's a cyber attack, you always have to be prepared. There has to be a strategy of deterrence, there has to be a strategy of protection, and then there has to be a strategy of consequence mitigation if anything happens. I think the same thing stands for cyber, and another analogy for cyber attacks is crime. There's been a history of financial crime, fraud, organized crime, and everything. You're never going to completely eradicate it, but you can certainly make progress against it. And that's how we have to look at the cyber threat. It's not something we're going to win. It's something that we're going to stay ahead of causing real existential damage through cyber attacks. And that's got to be the government's goal, to make sure that things that cause long-term national security, national economic security, community well-being type things don't happen through cyber attacks.
So far in this effort that you say it's going to be ongoing, and this is the new normal, if you will, what's missing so far that you would like to see implemented ASAP when it comes to tackling this issue?
I mean, there's certain sectors that are of critical infrastructure of the economy that are undercapitalized in their ability to provide cyber defenses. We've seen this in the water sector, we've seen this in the healthcare sector, in education sector, and so some real targeted investments in better technologies that are part of what's in water systems, operational technologies, industrial control systems, targeted investments in better databases and updates to software that's used in healthcare systems, in the schools, and then grant money, technical assistance from the nonprofit community, a market that's set up to help the cyber poor catch up on things. I think that's really an area where there needs to be a little more focus.
And I mean, focus,
but elections fall into that. And in some of the work I was doing while I was at CIS, it was about filling that gap to support state and local election officials, which remains a priority.
Right. Well, it's interesting to hear focus, while in the same vein, there's so many areas, that you've listed that could use attention when it comes to preventing and really staying ahead of this issue. Bob Kolasky, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Appreciate the insight. And folks, we'll be right back.